Jedd Fisch has no plans to cancel the spring game.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just a reminder, wherever you get the show, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever it might be, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out a lot for here on YouTube. Click that little bell for the notifications. All that really does help us out a lot. Keeps you up to date with all the breaking news, all the latest that's happening over the course of the offseason, because we're still going to be coming to you every single day. And we're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere at Locked On Huskies. Give us a follow for all kinds of updates over there as well. Lars, got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're talking about some recruits in the 2026 class that you and I want to keep an eye on. Some guys that have been offered by linebackers coach Brian Odom and safeties coach Taylor Mays that are really interesting, might signal some defensive changes or what the philosophy under Ryan Walters might be. But the big thing, spring games around the country, they're getting canceled for other activities, for the old Chris Peterson style spring showcase. That's not the case here at Washington. Jedd Fisch is full steam ahead, going with the spring game, and he wants to sell it out here.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, I covered the Chris Peterson era, okay? Like, I am fully aware of, every time. Like, here's the thing. It's a double-edged sword, because I agree with Jedd that, okay, first of all, like, most teams are recruiting a lot of the similar players. Like, teams in the Big Ten are recruiting, offering, like, you go through a kid's offer list. We'll talk about a few of them coming up. Big Ten, SEC. Like, everybody already knows the kids that are there and where they end up signing and things like that. So either you're not doing your job if you have to use a spring game to evaluate somebody else with telling, oh, I didn't know about that guy. It's like, oh yeah, coach, we offered him a couple years ago. You don't remember, like, oh, well, probably because you didn't put in the time. So how are you going to get him in the portal if you didn't, like, build a relationship to go with? And that's why Jedd emphasizes everything about relationships is, yeah, why not put everything out there, engage the community, make it a pro atmosphere. Like, if the Seahawks had a fan fest, which they do every year, they have it at CenturyLink and fans show up, it's not, 40, 50, 60,000, but it's also not a game. So I understand if it's going to be like a fan fest, yeah, I can understand why fans might not want to go and things like that. But when it's actually, now you finally got what Chris Peterson would never deliver you, which is an actual game, actual passes. And by the way, knock on wood right now, but the team's healthy enough to where you can actually have two offenses. You can see Dash Bailey versus Damon. You can see Dash versus Tristan. You can see what Kai Horton can do if, God forbid, Damon goes down or just comes out for any play, which I doubt will happen, but unless they're up by like 25. But the whole point in that being, like, everybody already knows what's on your roster. So it's kind of weird when Matt Rule and other coaches say, well, we don't want guys evaluating our talent and poaching our players. It's like, you're more worried about playing defense on your own program than you are empowering the guys that you're paid 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever million to coach and develop. That's why Jedd, and again, a lot of people say, well, it's coach speak, that Jedd's still in the NFL and all this, and that's like, yeah, but he's actually putting validation behind it. If you look at all the hires that he's making, everything that he's doing, it's like, yeah, it is exactly like an NFL program. And yeah, it's kind of annoying. I'm sure people are like, oh, it's an annoying stuff. Like, yeah, but it's also factual. And so when you look at NFL teams, they have those engagements, but they don't have a game. Like, if you had a free preseason game, you wouldn't tell me like 40,000 people wouldn't want to show up to that, like, as long as you get a somewhat decent game.
So that's what I wanted to get into, where I think that's a really important part of this is one thing that I noticed last year. I'm not the only one who noticed this. I know you and I talked about it on the show, and it was very obvious from the people in the stands that he did a really good job generating energy around the game, and he made it fun. That was something for, the longest time, as long as I can remember. If you got 1,000 people in the stands for the spring showcase or a spring game, like the 2023 spring game, I remember that went viral with how few people were there when it was, hey, this is supposed to be a top 10 team in the country, where Jedd did a really good job of that. And I think that's part of that. It's generating interest. And whenever Jedd talks about being a fan at heart, that's something that really resonates with me, because at the end of the day, Lars, you and I cover football. We do this show. We write at our respective websites because we love covering football. We love watching sports. We love doing all this stuff. And seeing him say that that's really what it's about. It's about, me giving me the opportunity to step back and let my position coaches call plays and be head coaches and do all that sort of stuff, and let the GAs step up and be position coaches. That's what it's about. It's about empowering not just the players to go out and have fun and play a game and show me what they have, but it's about everybody else around it. It's about the experience. It's about like everything he did. I really just commend him for and give him props for last year in terms of advertising the way that he did. Now that you've got a full roster, not a partial roster, plus, another year under your belt and seeing what that all looked like last season, I think he can help take a step forward and generate interest in the program, which is such an important thing in this area and really can be so much fun when it is on a Friday night. It's not a, Saturday at 11 a.m. or noon sort of thing and nobody shows up. No, it's fun when it's, Friday night under the lights. The stadium is somewhat packed, at least the lower bowl was pretty full last time. Like those are things that matter, and giving everybody the opportunities where, he talked about the not being, too concerned by the transfer portal where, it's something we're going to get into. We're almost certain that a couple guys on this roster will not be around by the time the game comes around because they're over the 85-man scholarship limit right now. And Jedd said, if guys don't want to be here, they don't want to be here. I can't control that. That's okay. We're not worried about schools poaching players. Whatever comes of that, comes of that. But on the other side, just saying the spring transfer portal window is going to be closed, so I don't have to worry about that. And just saying, I want to proceed with a game because it's fun and it's, as it's for the fans as much as it is for the players. I respect that. I think that's a great way to address this and go about it.
Yeah. And it's not like you're also, when you have a spring game, even when here's the prime example is Alabama with Nick Saban. Like, yeah, granted he was on the field wearing a pink or a crimson suit. I don't think it was crimson, but he would always be like on the field on ESPN of all things. So it's like, right. The spring games are so horrible that the number one team at the end of every season is somehow holding a spring game and not getting their roster rated. Like, to me, that it just never made any sense. And it's like, on one hand, the whole, if you're going to make an argument against it, it's to prevent injuries. And that's kind of why the game, even with Jedd, the way he does it, he wasn't the one calling the plays. It was KC and Jimmy Doherty. And I remember, I think, what was it, the double or triple pass where it's like, yeah.
The double pass. Yeah. That was Cummings' call. Yeah.
And you remember, what was it, the Indiana game, or there was one this season where it's like they ended up not breaking out a double pass away, but it was like where DeMond ended up having a catch or some manner or form where. Yeah,
that was the Michigan game, I believe.
Exactly. So there's proof where clearly Michigan didn't use that film to prepare for that play, and B, also it empowers your coaches and empowers everybody else to where. Well, why would Jimmy Doherty be getting NFL opportunities? Well, because he's kind of a creative play caller, and Cameron Cummings the same way, where it's, oh, hey, that was KC's route. KC was the one that, did, and the way that Jedd handled it when he was like, oh yeah, they didn't run that one up the flagpole, but it was fun to see, and ended up coming to fruition in the season. And so I'm not saying that you're going to go to the game expecting to see UW versus Ohio State. Like the spring game will not be that level. You're not even opening more than 20% of the playbook, like base defense. Because again, you don't want to injure your own players here. So the whole point is something fun for the fans, where it's more than just a bona fide practice. Because when those Chris Peterson spring showcases were there, and it's okay, we're going to go through the linebacker drills. And it's like, well, yeah, that's why even though practices, as Jedd said on Wednesday, that all practices will be open to fans in the spring. As much as fans say, hey, we want free access and all that. You and I both see how many fans come out to those things. It's not a lot, even the combine and everything like that. That's not necessarily a shot at the fan base, but it's like, there's always so much to see when guys are going drill to drill, and maybe a solid 15, 20 minutes of scrimmaging if you're lucky, depending on the practice. And so there's understandably why fans might come out for practices unless you're a true diehard and things like that. But on the other side of that coin, when you do have a big opportunity to end the season, and almost end the preseason to lead up to the regular season, this is kind of your like luau at the lake, your spring luau at the lake, where it's like, hey, you know what, come hang out, make it a party. Jedd said, make it a party. Like, let's have some fun with it. Bring sailgating, and the weather will be pretty good in May.
So it's exactly that, where there are going to be a couple official visits for that week, including Derek Coleman-Brusso. So you want to make sure that you show him and some of the other guys, Tyson Bacon, David Schwarzel being a couple other names, Camden Jensen are the four right now that are supposed to be on campus for that. You want to make sure that you show those recruits a strong atmosphere, even during a spring game like that. But on top of that, you're coming off a 6 and 7 season, including the bowl game. You want to do whatever you can to generate energy because you, as Jedd talks about all the time, you believe that you can take a big step forward, and you believe that you can say, hey, yeah, with DeMond, with all these pieces we have coming back, with the acquisitions we made in the portal, we're going to take a big step forward. And this is your first real opportunity to sell that. So I think it's something that fans would want to attend. And on top of that, with all the improved talent that you and I expect to see on the field this year, it would be a truly fun experience. So the fact that he's not canceling it is a really great idea. But Lars, speaking of the recruiting side of things, there are some really interesting offers going out. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You'll be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, you want to make sure your family's financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockdowncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockdowncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. So Lars, some offers that are going out where, it's a little, I don't want to say it's a little late in the game because offers can go out whenever, but for some of these 2026 guys with some new coaches, with Brian Odom, Taylor Mays, they've shown that they're offering some hybrid linebacker, safety, outside linebacker type defenders, and they're very intriguing. And you're the one who brought this up when we were doing our pre-show planning. I know there were a couple names that were really sticking out to you.
Yeah, well, the first one today, obviously Thursday being the day that I'm referring to here, just to be clear, even though hello to everybody listening on Fridays. With that being said, Nico Gendreau is, I'm going to shoot my shot on the last name there, safety from Arizona, Chandler High School. And again, when Jedd Fisch first came out, one was the thing that you kind of emphasized a lot was Adam Muhammad, guys that Michael Watkins, a lot of guys from the state of Arizona. We've seen, the Parker Broses of the world come from there. And so it's always a good state for underlying talent. And the reason why I bring up Nico is he was offered by Taylor Mays on Thursday morning-ish, I want to say. Looks like he already has an official visit set to Oklahoma. So, again, when we're talking about being late in the game, he's only got one visit set so far. I'm curious to see kind of what that means for some of the other guys and kind of how these new coaches develop those relationships and balance it with, some of the other safeties like the one from Utah that his name is escaping off the top of my head.
Celeste Moa.
Thank you. But so obviously, like, you're still chasing after the top end guys, but you need to build through, those lower ranks and see if you can find some hidden gems in there. And you show the tape's promising to me. Like, that's the kind of intriguing part about, does he end up being a nickel? Does he end up being a drop back strong safety? I mean, 6'1", 185, you can do both. So to me, that was an intriguing offer that I saw this morning.
So I agree with you, but let's take it a step further because it's not just nickel. It's not just safety. It's linebackers. So it's one of those things where you look at his 247 ranking and you're going to see somebody who's outside of the top 10 in the state of Arizona, rated as an 85 in like the 80s somewhere. I believe I was just looking at it a minute ago in terms of safeties ranked in the country in 2026. But none of that matters when you've got Oklahoma interest, you got Oregon interest. I know Iowa State's in the mix. There are a couple other Power 4 programs. So it's one of those things where you look at it and you say, this is one of those guys where, everything matters in terms of who's interested in him, where he's setting official visits, because that shows what the talent is and where, obviously where the interest is as well. But it also shows that high-end schools see that projectability in him. So trying to, set up an official visit, all that sort of stuff in Washington is something you and I would certainly keep an eye on. But on top of that, it also shows something that I don't want to say that, these guys have started, but it's something that Ryan Walters is continuing from this, more of a Jedd Fisch vision, because Steve Belichick did this as well. And it seems like it's something they did a little bit at Arizona, where it's just flexibility in the secondary. I think about the role that Gunnar Maldonado played over the last couple of years during his time with Arizona specifically. And it's something where they just like having guys who can do a lot of different things on the back end. And it's just interesting to watch where, in the mold of Jonathan Epperson, in the mold of Donovan Robinson, in the mold of a lot of guys that, they brought into the transfer portal, and CJ Christian and Alex McLaughlin as well. We talked a couple days ago about the role that X-Ray Alexander can play in the front and Buda Al-Ukta, and how you might be able to move a lot of those guys around and just line them up in different locations. And the versatility that these guys bring to the table is very, very important. And you kind of throw the rankings out the window.
Yeah, and anytime you have a brother pairing, that's always kind of a sell for because you're talking about Derek. You mentioned Derek Coleman-Bruce in the last segment. Like, again, no need to say one or the other. Why not take both? The Parker brothers, the Hatchets. Who else are we missing here? Like, it seems like UW is almost brother you in a in a way.
Yeah, right.
If you think about it. So that's never, one thing to think about. That's not something to brush aside, where it's not a guarantee that you get the brother, but it's also like, well, how many times have you ever heard where, hey, let's go our separate ways and see if we can ball out. I mean, look at the Bosa brothers. They both went to Ohio State. I'm not saying it's either at the same time or whatever, but it just, anytime you can kind of build that family together, and especially, how many times did Jedd Fisch mention family on Wednesday? Probably a solid half dozen to a dozen.
I need to start a counter with some of those buzzwords, man.
I was thinking about that on yesterday's show, and I was like, it's like the Family Guy episode when they count out 100 deaths in one episode or whatever, and it's like, no, how many times can you mention organization and family in one sentence? But it's also true. But here's the thing. Yes, they are buzzwords, but it's also true. And so I think, offering both of them from the state of Arizona, to me, which one ends up playing which position, because I know Bo's listed as a linebacker. And so to me, that you can kind of go both ways with it, where that's a heck of a kind of did Shaquille and Shaq Griffin play together at UCF at the same time? Were they in the same class?
They did, yes.
So that would be, again, we've seen it before. So again, why not make that work? You saw it in the NFL. You can make it work in Washington.
So I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, where Bo Jandro is the one you're talking about, where he's got the Oregon stuff. We're gonna see how all this works out, but I'm very curious to kind of parlay this into a different conversation that you and I wanted to have, and that's it's the Derek Coleman-Brusso conversation, right? Where it's about selling that family atmosphere at every chance you get. Where that's why we brought him up at the spring game. We're going to talk about him a little bit more later on, where he's got his full just schedule of official visits set up for the summer. But when I look at that and I just look at what it could be in this class, just that family atmosphere is something that has always intrigued me, because as you said, it is a buzzword, and it is something where, you and I have talked to plenty of recruits in our day covering just the world of recruiting, the world of high school and college athletics. And the family culture, the family environment is something that you always hear, but it's something that, as you said, Jedd talked about in his Wednesday press conference, where he said, yeah, that's why 23 coaches and their families followed us up here from Arizona, is because it was something they wanted to be a part of, and because we actually treat it that way. And that's something that, you and I don't have that behind the scenes look. So we have to take a lot of this from what we're told by not only Jedd, but from some of these recruits as well. So it's very interesting to see that being sold.
But in that thing, that some people say, well, it's not necessarily being shown. It's not being sold. It's being shown. I think it's kind of how I would describe it. Where you actually see it's one thing to sell it. We've heard coaches throughout our time here, even before you heard. I mean, the Sark days when he would try and sell the NFL, and Jimmy tried to sell the NFL, and there's every coach is going to sell. I mean, I don't think I would love to actually hear a coach be like, you know what? I'm just looking for 85 dudes. You really just go for gridiron gang of college football. I mean, I think Miami had that back in the 80s, but that's a separate conversation for a separate day. But it really does, at the end of the day, you're talking about family, and that's why all of this is so important, because Taylor Mays, why did he come home to the city of Seattle, even though he went to USC and went away? Well, one reason he went away was because he wasn't going to play for Tyrone Willingham, and nobody would blame him for that. So when you think about it, the fact that he's coming back it's what everybody always says. What Will Conroy used to say: "Don't turn your back on Washington, put Washington on your back." Well, initially Taylor Mays turned his back on Washington, but he really didn't turn his back on Washington. Washington let him down in the beginning, and now knowing what he knows and being a pro in the NFL, and same thing with Brian Odom, why we kind of wanted to mention these linebacker safety guys. These are your two new hires on the staff that are going to be your recruiters. We've already seen the impact that they made, and what Jedd mentioned, about Brian Odom during his press conference, where not a maniacal recruiter, but a guy who has long-standing ties at USC and Oklahoma and Missouri and all those sorts of stops. And then Taylor Mays being a natural West Coast guy, dad's in Seattle, his relationship with Monty Kohler is well documented. And so you put those two things together, they're still going to be going into new areas, not new areas, but going into Arizona, going east. And I know they offered Colin Campbell, the number one player in the state, offensive tackle there as well. So there's certain states where it's you want to build at home, but you also want to do it on the road. And that's why you having these two paired together was such an important hire, because everybody wants to say, oh, go get a former UW player for this position and that position. You might actually be surprised what you can get with guys who aren't necessarily tied directly to UW, who end up benefiting UW better.
Absolutely. Where, it's always valuable to have some of those guys around, but I think sometimes that gets lost because there are a few guys like that on the roster. or on the coaching staff, where it is Jimmy Doherty, it's Jordan Palpao, but it goes so far beyond that. Like, you think of Eric Hamburg and Jake Crawford, guys who were holdovers from the Kalen DeBoer era, who were very, very passionate about the university. That's why, Jedd talked about going and getting Silas Clapham as the director of college scouting, who got his master's at UW, Marcus Griffin, who's a Bellevue High School alum and played at Arizona, where it's not just getting UW alums, it's about getting Washington guys and about getting West Coast guys. And that's where Taylor fits in so perfectly. Yeah, he didn't play at UW, but he understands the area. He understands that his dad is the coach at O'Day, where I know these are all things we've discussed, but it's worth re-emphasizing because right now, this time of year, when it's, it's fantastic day today, right? 55, 56 and sunny. Oh, perfect. Oh, who would have thought in February? But it's getting, guys who can sell that and say, hey, we know there's this stigma around Seattle where it rains all the time. And, it's only sunny and nice a couple months out of the year. No, that's not necessarily true. And hey, how do I know that? I live there. I grew up there. These are all things that I know and I experience. And so, when you need to go down to Arizona, when you need to go down to LA, or you want to, go dig into Texas and dig into the South, these are all things that you can legitimately sell where it sounds silly, but these are all things that at the end of the day could end up mattering. And Lars, that's really important because there are a lot of guys who we think you really need to keep a close eye on right now. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Prize Picks. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps every game exciting. I love how I can make my picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long. When I win, my money hits my account in as little as 15 minutes. No waiting around. Prize Picks even offers weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Lars, one guy who I'm really interested in keeping an eye on is somebody who has Washington on the list of his top schools. I believe it's a top 6. It's CJ Lavender from Modern Day, where this is a guy who's a little bit underrated in terms of his actual 247 rankings right now, but has a really long, really impressive offer list, and is somebody who's supposed to be coming up for a visit at some point in March. I believe it's for junior day, and is one of the guys where if he ends up coming back up on an official visit and ends up at Washington, I wouldn't be surprised. And it's, he's one of those guys where versatile defensive back, I think he'd fit really, really well in the nickel, but as somebody where you just take a talent like that and you figure the rest out later.
Right. And the reason why Kevin Cummings used to talk about the receivers and kind of just as an offense, you want guys who already have been coached at a high level. In modern day, Dash Brewerly, Marcus Harris, you can just go down the list. Some guys that obviously didn't go to Washington, who I'm not going to mention, but modern day it's not a college. I mean, it is a college prep school. It's basically, it's the minor leagues of college football. And that's why schools, even though a guy might be a 3-star ranking, it's like, he's going to play above his skis. And especially when you look at the size that he has and all the measurables, checks every box. And I think that's what I'm curious to see how Ryan Walters uses some of these guys. Some of the couple of guys you talked about in the last segment, where you're looking at the projectability with the frame. All these 6'1", 6'2", hybrid guys who you can play in multiple different positions. Like, I know, again, it's still coach speak, but you're going to try to figure out your 11 guys, and you don't necessarily have to have a star, Mike, Husky, whatever position you want to call it. I mean, we could probably make a book on how many different schools have different positions. And It's all the same thing at the end of the day. It's 11 dudes lined up on one side of the ball, 11 dudes lined up on the other side of the ball. But the reason why I mentioned all that is all relationships, and you've been to Modern Day before. You know how to get guys from that school. So I think no matter who ends up kind of stepping up against UW in the battle, you have to feel pretty good about UW's chances.
So let's talk about another guy where, just while we're on the Modern Day topic, one guy that I think is really interesting, where he's got a very full summer of official visits already set up with, I'm just going to run through them real fast, Alabama, Ohio State, USC, Texas, and Oregon, is Kayden Dixon-Wyatt from Modern Day. Well, that's somebody you and I have talked about briefly, where he's another guy who is supposed to be on campus for the junior day on March 8th. And it's something where that's a top 60 guy in this class right now by the 247 rankings. And I'm very intrigued in keeping a close eye on him, because while it seems like Washington might be on the outside looking in, the fact that he's coming on campus for the junior day is very, very important. You don't have to limit yourself to 5 official visits anymore, where, with the way his schedule is shaped up right now, it'd either be a midweek thing or, right before or maybe he'd scheduled for the spring game. But that's just a name that I'm very interested in because in something you've talked about with Mark Bowman, you talked about with Marcus Harris, it's that chemistry with Dash that ends up being really, really important at the end of the day. And, that's one of the reasons you want to take Marcus Harris is have somebody who is very familiar with one of your quarterbacks. And that's really, really helpful. So having a guy who can stretch the field the way Kayden does, and just one of those really, really refined receivers that you and I have talked about is just a very intriguing thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's the same thing kind of we talked about with Audric Harris, where it comes from a grade school in Bishop Gorman, obviously two different schools here, but you're a pro high school or pro college in that sense, ready player who you can plug in, and depending on how many games he ends up playing, so be it. But you look at it's a rough comparison, but like Demoria Stringfellow, when he had that projectability and NFL body coming out, it's one of those guys where you mentioned with CJ Lavender, like just find a way to get him on your roster. Those types of players where, other schools might pass him over. You might not be able to flip the Donovan Lubides, the Andrew Marshes. And it's not to slight those high-ranking players, but how often do those guys pan out to the comparison of the three-star guys where it's, oh, wow, that guy was kind of passed over in high school, but ended up going to a good situation, balled out, and now is arguably going to be in a better position at Denzel Boston, if you will, where it obviously went to a smaller school in Emerald Ridge, but same size, same measurables, and you just look at it. It's like, there's a reason why Jamarcus Shepard was like, I don't need to meet with Denzel and see him on the field and test him and do all that. I met him one time in high school. That's all I needed to know that he could be on campus, and we'll figure out the rest later because he can play on. You look at the size and the coaching experience. Those are all the key tenets that you look for when you're trying to recruit some of these guys.
So you mentioned Donovan Lubide, somebody like that, where he's a little bit lower ranked than Donovan was in the 25 cycle, but somebody who I'm really, really intrigued by. And I know Washington has him in the top 10. I wrote about it a little bit over on Huskies Wire, that I wouldn't be surprised if Washington is much higher than just inside the top 10, is four-star Mason James from Norman High School in Oklahoma, where he's a guy who's going to be coming up for an unofficial. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up setting up an official visit a little bit later on as well. But this is a guy who you talk about stepping outside the typical footprint a little bit. I know we talked about Mason a little bit a few weeks ago, but it's something that you and I really wanted to dive in on because as Kevin Cummings continues to try to, again, expand his footprint and try to step out and say, hey, look, I can go into the South and I can go into this, traditionally SEC country and win a battle for somebody like this. I think Mason is a really, really intriguing prospect in that light.
Yeah, I mean, they've gone after guys in the state of Oklahoma before in the ironic part of the 8-0 in Oklahoma. So there's plenty of love for Oklahoma. I think it's just hard for some of those guys where traditionally, I'm sure you talked to some of them, where they end up a lot in those Midwest schools or not Southeast schools more. I mean, there's a couple that go to the Southeast, but a lot of them seem to, Ohio, Iowa State, Iowa, Texas, for whatever reason, but it's still worth the effort to go and try and build those relationships because the same thing with Caleb Smith, where you offer the same three guys from his high school, you get one of them. What's not to say, we'll always go back to the Javon Parker example. Armand was the one that was recruited more. Javon is the one who's proven himself more. So you can always take both guys or, try and fish the entire net versus try and say, oh, we just want the top guy from that school. No, actually, those lower ranked guys might end up panning out more. And that's why you trust your development and evaluations. That's, again, why you have an entire scouting department and have all these coaches that's, vet through all these things. And it's why you're making all these investments is to go and find the best guys and develop them. And sometimes they might not always be the best, highest ranked player, but they're the best player at the end of the day. So
let's talk about that highest ranked player at the end of the day, because, we talk about some of those guys where somebody who's West Coast in terms of just where he's from and everything plays at IMG Academy in Florida. That's Keenyi Pepe, another guy who going to be on campus for the junior day. And I wanted to make sure we talked about Derek Coleman-Brusa, but as I was kind of going through this list of all the guys we had written down, this would be a name, that would be a name. I think Keenyi Pepe is the one to keep an eye on here more than truly anybody else, because this is the kind of guy where you and I talked about Brady Smigel being the headliner of the class, being the most important one who can tie a class together. Derek Coleman-Brusa, what he would be able to do for this class. Imagine if you're able to go into Florida, go into IMG, and get one of the top 5 offensive tackles in this class with a kid that looks and moves like that at 6'7", 6'8", 320. That's it would be an otherworldly commitment. We don't need to go down that road right now, but it's something where he's going to be visiting Washington again. He's going to be on campus for junior day. And the fact that you were all like that you're able to get 2 unofficial visits from him. I know the first one was with IMG as a team. That already says something. And if you're able to get him back on campus again for an official visit in May, in June, like we're not saying this because we have, inside info, this is going to happen. This is just something where we're looking at what has been laid out in front of us already and saying, hey, this is something to keep an eye on.
In a way, as you were saying that, I'm like, you brought in Carver Willis as a tackle from K-State for 1 year. That's your NFL side of the, hey, we're going to develop Carver into day 1, day 2 pick potentially. And then you look at Pepe and it's like, wait a minute, who's really behind him? Can I vie for that spot? And that's why, again,
right,
the higher rank you bring in every single year, same reason why Brady Spiegel might be ranked higher than Damon, and depending on how you look, which ranking you look at, you're going and getting you're always elevating your talent. And so that's why, even though you had a pretty decent, 2025 offensive line haul, that doesn't mean in 2026 you still don't shoot for the stars and say, hey, wait, we actually could have got that guy if we put in a little more effort. And that's why Jedd's going coast to coast, why he's emphasized Florida in the first couple months of months when he got to Washington, and now really developed that out with Braden Weinsbrand and some of the other guys from Florida. They don't have to be necessarily from Florida, but you're willing to make that trip all the way east and invest those resources. And when the kid reciprocates, pretty interesting sign.
Absolutely. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.